The Dominion Lands Act of 1872 opened the prairies to the greatest migration effort in the history of the world. People with courage in their hearts and a desire to fulfill dreams of prosperity headed west. If you were 18, had $10, and were willing to work, 160 acres of prime farmland could be yours. They came from every station in life and from every corner of the planet. Many living in the States crossed the border for this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The Tone brothers also hit the trail. William, the oldest at 33, who was married to Ellen Phelan, traveled to Moose Jaw in 1903 with 2 children and bought a farm. The younger boys, James 24, Richard 21, and Matthew 19, along with cousin Thomas Dunn and friend William Broman, left Ontario also in 1903 and headed west. They dug water wells to finance the journey and the cost of developing their homestead. For 2 years they based their operation near Brandon, Manitoba. They slowly moved further west, searching for good land and plentiful water. Their search took them to Saskatoon to no avail. Then in early 1907, James, Richard, and Bill Broman each filed on adjoining quarters of Section 16, Township 18 of the Saskatchewan Landing Area, near a village called Swift Current. The Cree Indians named the creek Kassiskatchewan, which means it flows swiftly. French fur trappers in the 1800s called it Rivière au Courant, or Swift Current, and indeed it does, as it flows across 100 miles of windswept prairie until it empties into the mighty South Saskatchewan River. Surveyors for the Canadian Pacific Railroad soon followed the fur traders, and by the early 1880s the line was staked as far west as Swift Current Creek. The town unofficially began on December 10, 1882, when a rail car was set aside with a sign that read Swift Current, but didn't actually achieve town status until March of 1907, with a population of 550 persons. Swift Current was the freight terminus for all of Western Canada. Long trains of wagons pulled by slow-moving oxen cut deep ruts as they pulled their heavy loads over the Battleford Trail. The expansion effort created by the desire to acquire cheap land caused the biggest boom in Swift Current history. Long lines of homesteaders waited in front of the land titles office, and business grew rapidly. There were 8 major banks, 5 hotels, 4 theaters, and 3 newspapers as thousands of settlers brought hope of opportunity into the farming and ranching region. Life was good for the homesteaders. Most of them had the necessary skills to provide for a decent living, unless they didn't get any rain, or too much all at once, or blight didn't damage the crops, or insects didn't eat it, or the market price for their grain didn't fall, or the milk cow dried up, or the hens quit laying, or if they didn't fall prey to despair from the daily routine of providing the basic needs, food and shelter. Here's a member of the second generation born on the prairie, Marion, granddaughter of Dick Tone, sharing some insight from her Aunt Pat about those that were left behind.
Imagine, if you can, the grief of family separation back in the days of pioneers. For weeks and months, the entire family would have been in a fever pitch of excitement and activity. Plans were made, clothing and bedding were sewn, crates and crocks were packed, and supplies purchased or prepared sufficient for many months, or even years. Consider packing all that food, from molasses to salt, pickled, dried, salted, canned. There were lamps and fuel needed for them, grease for the wagons, repair for the harnesses, besides guns and gunpowder, tools, nails, rope, crocks, kettles, pots and pans, dishes, medicine, seeds, clothing, and material to make more when those wore out. Furniture or equipment that the family could afford and find room for was packed in the wagons. A stove, sewing machine, beds, chairs, table, they all had to be taken along. The packing was carefully done. Breakables were packed in sawdust and crated in handmade boxes. Many items needed to be protected against water damage, for there were many rivers to be crossed and rains to be endured. The crates would be unpacked at journey's end and disassembled. Every board would be carefully hoarded for some future building project. A window frame, a stool, a small crib. The The sawdust would be used sparingly to feed a fire, sprinkled lightly over smoking buffalo chips. The crocks and jars containing foods they had carried west were used over and over after they had yielded up their store. Yes, it was a monumental task. The preparation for such a move must have taxed bodies and emotions to the limit. But when it was all done, wagons loaded, teams hitched and ready to go, what then? Mothers and fathers would bid their offspring farewell, knowing that they may never see them again. There was almost no means of communication, and many hoped not to hear, for it was only bad news that was relayed. When great-grandma Margaret Murphy Tone bid farewell to her sons who traveled west, this would be the last time she would ever see Grandpa Dick, and would only see Uncle Jim one more time, when he took his beautiful bride and went back home. Wife followed husband, convinced her rightful place was beside him, regardless of the strong pull to stay with those she knew and loved. Danger, loneliness, and possible disaster awaited them in their new world, but she went regardless. I have often thought of those brave women, what it must have cost them to follow their men, to leave everything that held security and safety, to birth babies unattended, to nurse sick children with little or no medicine and no doctor, to be mother, teacher, minister, physician, tailor, and supermarket to a growing family, to support without complaint their men through floods, blizzards, sandstorms, and drought, to walk tall when there was little to wear, little to work with, and even less to eat. God bless them all who took this courageous step, and those who with tear-filled eyes let them go. God bless their memory, and grant us a measure of their strength, courage, love, and determination that prompted them to do what they did. For this is our heritage.